Well, guess what? We're declaring phase 1 of the logging railroad completed.
Isn't that wonderful? Wow.
When we started on this just over a year ago, I thought we'd be able to knock it out in a couple of months.
Right, right.
Anyway, you need to keep in mind that this is where the logging railroad actually lives.
Right.
It's up on this shelf above the games and jukeboxes and stuff. So the perspective is always, generally speaking, looking up at it,
right,
as opposed to looking especially down on it. Anyway,
don't want to do that.
Don't want to look down at it. But anyway, these are the building fronts. These were the last things that needed to go on, and then final assembly by moving everything up onto the wall, which is what we've done now.
Right.
Anyway, these building fronts are built by you.
Well, I've been going nuts. just a little. I started on building fronts and I can't stop.
These are just kind of freelance building fronts that you're building for your own gratification, but it seemed like, well, if that's a thing, then maybe we should use some of these as building fronts on the railroad.
Well, they're certainly lightweight and don't take up a lot of space.
So, keeping in mind that the backdrop is right up against the track.
Exactly.
And in most of these places, we only had, well, way less than half an inch.
Right. Some of these are just maybe not even an inch thick.
This is the backdrop as we were painting it on the benches. And I just printed these building fronts out on the computer and glued them on there.
They look okay.
Well, they were just sort of supposed to be a placeholder. They ended up being there for a lot longer than I thought. But the goal was to replace those with actual 3D building fronts.
Right.
Which is what you did.
Right. I thought I would just kind of change it around a little bit and make it look a little bit more 3D than just a flat print on a backdrop.
And you used some of the same buildings.
Right. I just printed off the building and put it over like either balsa wood or the foam core.
Yeah, and we still had some of those files that I used for printing that, so you just repurposed them.
Right, just layered them. I printed off several copies to get the 3D effect of the posts and the cornice and all of the decorations.
Now you can see that in a couple of places the old original prints still sort of show through, and it just looks like buildings further off in the distance.
Right.
Which is fine.
Right.
Now this was the source of the building fronts.
There it is.
You found them on the internet.
I just found a building as flat as possible, straight on shot, printed it off.
Yeah, you have to avoid any kind of perspective, or any, like this one has a watermark.
It does, but sometimes you can work around that.
Sometimes you can work around that. But this was more like what we were looking for, just a straight on shot, no perspective.
Right.
Of the front of a building.
Exactly.
And then you can print that, cut it out, and there it is.
There it is.
So these are all ones that we've grabbed, and we very well may use them somewhere else. Some of them are of a lower resolution.
Right.
And sometimes you can use those, sometimes not. But this is more like what we're after, a super high resolution, straight on side or front of a building.
Right.
And then you can even cut and paste those together and glue those to a backdrop, just like this.
Yeah.
We're going to be using some of these down in the city. I think it's going to be Alamosa.
Alamosa, that will be fun.
This is the Joe Smith building, Joe Smith lamp oil, and then you did the signage in Photoshop.
I did.
And then just printed it out and ready to go in there.
So I found a nice brick pattern on the internet, and I just found even corrugated cardboard works fine. I just use a glue stick or a Mod Podge and glue it on there and cut it out to the desired size that I want.
Nice thing working with paper and foam core and stuff is it's so darn easy to work with.
Well, it is, and everybody gets a lot of cardboard boxes. Just flatten out the good pieces. Don't throw them away. Ever.
Yeah, and don't throw them away, recycle them.
Now on this one, I decided to use foam core for the building fronts. And I printed off like 2 or 3 copies and just layered them like to make the arches more 3D looking.
Yeah, we have a little tiny bit of space, and then for like the lamp oil building here, because the track curves away, you were able to curve the front of the building.
Right, I made it on a little bit of an angle.
And that gave us the ability to have a very, 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 very small interior in there as well.
It was fun to put that in.
For the most part, these things have to be limited to about a half an inch.
Right.
This is going to work.
Now, out on the garden railroad, we used these Burwood wall hangings from the 70s.
Right, they were so popular back then, but now they're readily available on eBay.
But the nice thing with those is they sit well back from the track, and they're also just about the right size in terms of scale. We had a bit of an issue when we come inside, because if we make the buildings full size, they look funny because they're right next to the track.
Right.
So you did a forced perspective.
Yes, and that's been a bit of a trick, but I did get the idea from the Burwood because they are like 3D.
Yeah, and in this case, the buildings are smaller and tapered, and just a lot of little tricks to make them look like they're 40 feet back from the track.
Yes.
Instead of 2 inches back from the track.
Right.
But you can see the bevel cut right here that gives it that perspective.
Right. If you do artwork, you learn about your vanishing point and all of that. And then the interiors have to be done the same way.
Yeah, you still have to follow the exact same perspective lines.
Yes, watching that vanishing point.
And that way it really looks like the interior is deep. It goes way back in there.
Right.
Keeping in mind that the viewing angle is almost always from below looking up, and the vanishing point has to sort of match that viewing angle. Now, from this perspective, you can see a problem.
Yes, you can see it's just stuck to the backdrop. Whoops.
So we had to find a way to disguise the fact that there is no building there, that it's just a front, and painting a building on the backdrop never works. And so the plan here was to cover up the edges of the building and the edges of the forced perspective and that sort of thing with vegetation.
Right, that always works.
That way, because the vegetation is going to be three-dimensional, and then that way you can't see what we're seeing here, that these are just building fronts stuck to the backdrop.
Right.
We have to hide that.
Right.
And a well-placed tree
Exactly.
like this one, notice how now you can't see that there's no building there.
Right.
And also you can sort of paint vegetation on the backdrop to make it look like there's vegetation up against the side of the building.
Right.
But for the most part, you need these 3D elements, these bushes and trees, and then that will cover up the fact that there's no building.
Right.
Also, those big boulders can be used for covering up missing buildings. Now, this is a kind of normal perspective. You see the real buildings in the foreground, and all you're seeing of the building flats on the backdrop is just distant buildings.
Right.
And boy, doesn't that look nice.
It looks really good.
Now, fortunately, nobody will ever see the railroad from this perspective.
No, not unless you're on a ladder.
You'd have to get on a tall ladder or hang from a sky hook or something. So we didn't have to worry about the missing roofs.
No.
We just have to worry about the fact that the building flats themselves have an edge and some forced perspective, and that all needs to be blended into the 3D scenery because this is the normal viewing angle.
Right.
And from here, all that stuff is very easily disguised.
Yes.
So these real full-size trees, these were all made by our friend Al Badham.
Right.
And he was a genius at doing trees. But between Al Badham's trees, the strategically placed bit of vegetation or bushes, and there it is. You really don't notice
No.
the edge of the building anymore. If you look closely, you can see it. But
Right.
there's always going to be some breakdown point. But for the most part, that really covers up the fact that it's just a flat glued to the front of the backdrop. Now, all of our buildings, including the building flats, need to have lights inside them.
Of course. They look better when they're illuminated.
When I was a kid, I first put lights in my model railroad, and it opened a whole new horizon for me. And since then, it's like that's more than half of the fun,
Well, of course.
is putting the lights in the building and then turning out the room lights and enjoying the lit buildings.
Right.
But how do you light a flat building?
That's a good question.
So we had to come up with a technique, and fortunately we were able to, with something called an electroluminescent panel.
Isn't that cool?
Isn't that the neatest thing? You can buy these on eBay or Amazon. I think they were originally designed for LCD screens. It's the light source behind the liquid crystals. But you can buy these. They're very thin, And you can even cut them out with scissors. And there's a sheet of paper. And cuttable.
That's just wild, the fact you can cut it.
Yeah.
I'm almost tempted to put 2 buildings. There's enough there for that building and maybe a smaller one to the side.
Absolutely.
So we don't have to cut it.
And we found that cutting it is worth avoiding.
Yeah, try to avoid that one.
Because this is what happens when you cut it. I cut this one down to go in one of the buildings that had to be very specifically sized. And you can see that it really kind of destroys the edge where you cut it.
It does.
It doesn't light up and you get some funny color shifts. And, well, if you can avoid cutting into it, it's much, much better.
Right.
So this is the building with the cut panel in it. And if you notice over to the left, there is a slight color shift there.
Right.
But for the most part, it's you wouldn't know.
Right.
But underneath that one pillar is that really gnarly edge from cutting it out with scissors.
Well, these need an interior, so I looked all over on the internet for, again, a straight-on shot of an interior and printed it.
Yeah, and keeping in mind, once again, perspective lines.
Right.
Because the perspectives have to sort of match. But if it's straight on like this, even if it's slightly off to one side like this one, it works fine.
It works great.
And it's fun going out on the internet and searching for this kind of thing.
Right.
This is a photograph. Those others were drawings. But we agreed that this should be the interior of Gus Rich's Lakeshore Lodge.
Right. I like the vanishing point on this where it goes off in the distance.
It really makes the building feel deep, and there's the finished product.
Right.
Isn't that cool?
Isn't it cool how the light shines right through the paper?
And all of the vanishing points and perspectives light up, line up, not light up.
They do that too. They actually light up.
And they light up. But that's the finished version.
These are just some more pictures that I found. Again, look for things with staircases. If you have an upstairs, it makes it feel like you're really going upstairs.
Well, and avoiding the ceiling is nice.
Right, if you can do that.
But sometimes if the ceiling lines up with the perspective lines like it does with this one, then that's fine.
It looks really cool.
But if it doesn't line up, then it would be better to just find something with a big open ceiling, because then you don't have to worry about it.
Right. So this looks kind of a mess, but this is where I cut out the interiors and put them on the back with tape. And also I put some blinds and curtains in using just green paper and lace.
Yeah, from this side, it doesn't look like much.
Oh, it looks awful.
But from the other side of the building, it lines up with the window frames and door openings and so on, and there it is.
That's what we're after right there.
Now, you used some lace there, too.
I did. I used that for curtains. Yes, gotta have curtains.
It's very girly, but it's perfect.
Hey, that's what it's all about.
That's absolutely right. So now let's try putting the electroluminescent panel behind it and see what that looks like.
Oh, there's the trial there.
And unfortunately, it looks like it's all lit with like fluorescent lights or something, because
Right.
the EL panels are really blue.
Right.
And this is our fix.
Uh-huh.
We found theatrical movie-making color correction gels. This is CTO, Color Correction Orange, and it comes in full, half, and quarter. And this one is a CTO half. And it just adds a lot of lovely golden color to that EL panel. And now it looks like that.
That looks a lot better.
Looks a lot better. And you can add even more warmth by going to a CTO full. I'll put some links in the description. There's CTO full.
Well, that looks nice.
Isn't that nice? So Gus Rich is getting the full CTO, color correction orange.
Absolutely right.
And these things are actually designed for doing that. Color correcting white light sources, blue-white light sources for filmmaking.
Right.
So it's perfect.
Right.
It's designed for that. Anyway, here's the finished version then. The EL panel and the CTO all taped in place on the back of the thing, and it's ready to be mounted to the backdrop with just some double stick tape.
Right. And notice we did use black tape to cut down on light leaks.
Yes, very important. Here's the hardware store.
That was a fun one.
And again, just this has a little less color correction to it so that it's still warm, but not quite as warm as, say, Gus Rich's.
Right.
Now, the other issue is that all of the 3D buildings are lit with practical lights, just a little grain of wheat incandescent bulbs. And we want to sort of match that same look. So you found these from Locomotive Joe.
Yes, a fellow online. Man, order from him. He's got some cool stuff.
And he makes these neat little overhead lights, these light fixtures. And so we put those up above where the locomotives won't snag on them. And strategically placed several of those to help tie it into the full 3D buildings. So wherever we could, we used some of these incandescent bulbs. And in fact, Joe Smith lamp oil is completely lit.
Yes.
With that, because it has an interior.
He's completely lit.
Joe Smith is lit. But the nice thing is, now with all the different lighting setups, because the foreground lights, we can change colors and intensity and all kinds of fun things. And boy, doesn't that look nice.
Oh, it just looks inviting.
It's turned out so well. I'm thrilled.
I can tell. It's been fun, though. It's been fun.
Well, next week, we're going to look at your other building fronts.
Oh, boy.
These were just designed to hang on a wall or sit on a tabletop.
Right.
They're not meant for the railroad.
They're replicas of buildings that once stood in my hometown that are no longer standing. They've been torn down, burned down. They're gone.
They're fun.
But I want to recreate them.
So there they are.
Yes.
and they're going to be lit using a lot of the same techniques.
Exactly.
So that's all next week's show. These other buildings that you're recreating from your hometown.
Right.
So you want to check that out. Well, phase 1 is finished.
Exactly. Wow.
There's going to be a lot more to the railroad than phase 1.
Right.
But this first 12 feet or so of railroad up above the games is finished.
Yes.
And we're ready to move on to some other things. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, please pop over to the channel.
Right.
And while you're over there, binge watch and do all those fun things.
Right.
And if you're not a subscriber, we want you to become a subscriber. Please become a subscriber. And you can do that by clicking on the blue button. Zoink, right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring and hopefully informative.
I hope.
And we will see you here on Tuesday because we're reviewing a product.